Hi, welcome to the Cinematography Salon podcast, a show about celebrating cinematography and inspiring both the current and next generation of visual artists, exploring the latest trends, techniques, technologies, and culture, and featuring exclusive interviews with some of the most talented and innovative cinematographers working today. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Pascucci, and I'm here again with Oren Sulfur.
Hello, we're back.
We are back, and today we will be conducting an interview with the founder of the Cinematography Salon and a cinematographer, David Kruta.
Hi. Thanks for having me. This is super exciting.
We are very excited to have you, David, and in many ways, this is the genesis of the whole project of the Cinematography Salon podcast, so it's very great to have you, and we're excited to dive in and talk a bit about how the Cinematography Salon came to be and hear a bit about your perspective as a cinematographer. So to kick it off, I'd love to just ask you about the history of the salon and how it started, and you can just give us a background, both for cinematographers who are familiar with the salon, but also just a general audience who maybe has never heard of it.
Well, totally. So, I'm glad that you guys, came to me with this idea to do this podcast. I think it's something that's been brewing in my head for a long time, and it just goes to show the power of community here. And, to kind of bring it back a few years, I used to work as a DIT, and, I was in 600 and I was working on a lot of features and commercials, and that to me was my film school, so I would go in, I would help, DPs do their thing, anything from teaching old school guys that, maybe came up through film that were trying to do the transition to digital, to working with younger innovative in the digital space. DPs that taught me all sorts of stuff. I still remember peeking my head around a corner and seeing what negative fill was for the first time. And that was pretty wild to me. But what I realized after I went full-time as a DP, that I no longer had the ability to, go on sets and kind of learn from people that were more experienced than me. And I found this sort of like growing knowledge gap that I wasn't able to get through things like American Cinematographer magazine or just through random chats with friends. So I started a little group. I think there were maybe like 4 or 5 of us at first. And the goal was to have a private place to discuss things that DPs would want to discuss privately, anything from how do you negotiate your rates with producers to how would you like this scenario. It's not something you'd probably want out there publicly if you've just been hired for a job and they see you asking questions about how to accomplish it. So, but in terms of naming it, I was inspired by the history of what salons are. So back in France, I think it was like the 1700s or 1800s, the salons were basically exhibitions, like almost gallery exhibitions from a variety of artists, and they were very exclusive. So there would be either a committee or some kind of person of authority that would choose who would get to go in or not. And what happened was that it ended up excluding a lot of people, and that the ones that come to mind are groups like the Impressionists, which today you look at their paintings and everybody knows them and everybody reveres them, but back then they were seen as too radical and too weird to actually be invited into these things. So they did a thing where they got together and they made their own salons. And that to me was kind of like like the rebellious nature kind of felt like that's what we're starting. So since then it's been, I think like 7 years or something since it started. And it's just grown into this insane, crazy community with thousands of people involved and, lots of people helping each other. And it's amazing. It's actually amazing to see.
So cool. Yeah. I love that, what you mentioned about the culture of it and it kind of being irreverent and the history dating back to fine art and everything is just like chef's kiss. Like, I think it's such a good fit for cinematography.
So David, I've been a member of the salon going way back to the Facebook group when we were still all kind of secretly asking each other questions about things that we didn't want people to know that we didn't know about. But ever since then, it's grown quite a bit. And you guys have been doing in-person meetups, live events, and I know you have some really great ambitions for where to take the group from here. Can you tell us a little bit about what the future vision of the salon is in your mind?
Sure. I think it's more about like piggybacking off of every sort of accomplishment. And, I think back to some of our earlier events, they were put together with the help of the community. We did a few here. I remember, Oren, you organized one in LA at one point. So it just kind of goes to show, just how involved the community is, and how I think we're all kind of wanting to do things together and get together and learn from each other. So that desire and that energy and piggybacking off of it, I think is going to guide, the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, hopefully. So we'll see. But some things we've been talking about, I posted a question to the group a while back about interest in a physical space. So I think that has a lot of demand. It is something I'm actively discussing and trying to figure out how it would fit into things. But I think bringing the salon into the real world, similar to how like the ASC has their clubhouse, it's a place for cinematographers to get together. But in my mind, it would be, you could have things as desirable as like a screening room or a place to test lenses, to just a place for people to get together, work on things, feed off of each other's creative energy. The ability to just like turn around to someone and say, hey, I'm working on this project and I can't figure out how to light this part of a set or something. And someone goes, oh, well, use these lights or something to that effect. Or, even if it's just like have a kegerator in there and get together and have a drink and shoot the shit for a while. Like I think it'd be fantastic.
Totally. Yeah, just a place for cinematographers to hang out, and having a space for lens tests and lighting tests, I think, is huge. Like that alone would be such a centerpiece of like an in-person community, and I think that would just be massive, especially if we can get one in each city.
Oh, totally.
We can work on it. We can work on it.
The ambition's there. It's it's baby steps, but I think there's the demand and the ambition, and it's not just about a physical space. I mean, the overall mission really is to educate. I think is kind of like the number one priority, and we've started doing that through a variety of meetups. We just did a thing with Abel Cine to do the Ed Lackman EL Zone class, which, by the way, sold out in like 4 hours, which was wild.
Yep.
So
well done.
like there's people want to learn, and I think that it's pretty hard for people to find that these days, especially for younger folks in the industry and younger folks in this position. It's the thing that I've always struggled with is that there's no, there's no like guild system. I know we have like guilds, but there's no guild system in the traditional sense where you would have a master and you would have an apprentice and you would bring them up. So, I think creating a system where it's inclusive and, we get rid of gatekeeping and we bring in people and we teach them how to do these jobs. And it's only going to serve to make the entire industry better. We'll produce better DPs and we'll produce a strong community that cares about the other people involved. So it's a long-term thing.
Yeah, I think what's really amazing about it for me is in the image of the iceberg that is the film industry, where above water, what you can see is people operating at a professional level who are in the union or in the ASC. There's a whole part of the iceberg that's under the water that is the whole group of people who are still kind of entering the industry and are at various stages of entering and starting their careers, who haven't quite broken through the waterline of, certain professional accomplishments yet, but they will. And having a group that's able to organize those people, share resources, foster a sense of community, education, and everything is just going to build up a really stronger foundation as all of those people start to see bigger professional career opportunities and everything. Like it's just a really great launch pad for that. I think I feel like the group really can serve as a really nice ramp into even more professional opportunities for people, and also just an organizational structure for people who maybe work in smaller markets or work on industrials or work on all sorts of other parts of the industry that maybe aren't under the purview of something as professional, quote unquote, organizational as a Local 600 or something. So I think it's really, really powerful in that regard.
Yeah, it really kind of serves all, different facets of cinematography. I also think the education thing is so inspiring because one of the taboo questions kind of for us is like, did you go to film school? It's kind of like this question that kind of hangs heavy when people ask because oftentimes it's, they're kind of wondering whether they can navigate this industry without film school and without the enormous expense of that. And I feel like there are not many answers to that question other than a group like this. It's like you can grasp at literature and, ASC Mag and things like that, but having an actual engaged group where you can really,
Totally.
like David said, sort of have that guild setup of master apprentice and kind of really trust the information being shared and the experiences. It's like there's really nothing else like it. So
Yeah.
I think it really serves a very valuable purpose in terms of, maybe long term also becoming a way for people to get off the ground without having to incur the expense of a bachelor degree.
And that's actually a great point to bring up. I was just thinking that part of the inclusivity it comes from my background. Like when I was a kid and going to middle school and high school, like I was never the cool kid. I was bullied quite a bit, and I was never invited to things. And having something like this, I want to make it open to people because I think a lot of people can grow and they have so much to contribute. And on the film school topic, like I applied to Emerson and I was rejected. So I didn't go to film school. I went on Craigslist and I worked on Emerson Productions. And here I am, right? So like the path to get here is not set. It's not defined by anybody. You can get here however you want. Not to say that there's anything bad about going to film school, but I don't think there should be stigma around not going.
Right. I mean, that's so cool to hear. And I think like it doesn't surprise me at all that path led you to form a group like this. Like it totally makes sense that was the path to here. And it's very cool to hear you share that.
So David, you're obviously also a working cinematographer and are facing the same challenges that I think everybody's been facing in the industry over the past few months.
Who says I'm working?
Well, let's talk about it. So tell us about why you think you're not working and what you think are the causes of this and how you've been kind of coping with it.
Yeah, so I've been working a little bit. The last year and a half, I've actually done a lot of direct to client work. I think the commercial industry has been kind of trending towards whatever we're seeing now anyway for a much longer time than this slowdown that we've got going on right now. I think a few people around and through conversations have made some interesting points. You got the looming writer's strike. Another point that was brought up was that there's just too much content. Everybody's been so busy, just absolutely slammed for the last couple of years. I mean, I remember how hard it was to hire a crew last year. And, I heard from a buddy that kind of sees where like Disney's going, right? And so Disney is apparently, reducing their streaming presence or getting rid of it entirely or something like that. And they just have too much content, right? And they're thinking of selling stuff off. And I kind of feel like, if you look at the big streamers, I mean, they're all kind of in the same boat. Like they don't function like old movie studios that just like have to go by demand and they can, only make so much content. These are almost pet projects for gigantic tech companies. And so they just dumped all this money into it, and now they've just got a glut of content. I mean, the amount of stuff that I see on my TV that I just scroll past because I don't have the time to watch it is insane. It's just like you're inundated by this stuff all the time. So perhaps with the overarching economic conditions, they're tightening their belts, realizing that they've done too much. So they have a little backlog to it. But I don't know, this isn't my first slowdown, so I'm fairly relaxed about it. I learned the hard way a few previous times when I, almost left the industry a few years back because it was so slow. But since then, I've, learned to find hobbies to keep myself busy, and make sure that I've got a bit of an emergency fund to draw from so I can get by for a few months. And, I think the big thing is like we as DPs, we tend to derive our identity from our work, so, I mean, I remember how that affected me personally when I was just doing commercials. I was just creatively drained. But, you go out to you go hang out with a group of DPs today and you ask, oh, how are you doing? and they say, well, I'm working on this, right? And it's just like, I didn't ask what you're working on. I asked how you are, and it's that answer every single time. And, if now it's slow and people are freaking out and they don't really have the thing that they get their identity from, like that's a total mindfuck. So,
Diversify.
yeah.
I think it's so important. I mean, I think I went through the exact same thing of, really tying my identity to the work, really not knowing what to do with myself when work slowed down, constantly comparing yourself to other people. I think that, yeah, it's such a great point that you need to kind of create these safety nets in your life, whether it be hobbies or whether it be relationships or, just other places to put your energy. There's nothing kind of more satisfying than having work slow down and kind of being excited about that. Like there's beauty in slowing down. I think our culture and our industry is like go, go, go. And it can be really, really overwhelming
Yeah.
sometimes.
I would just say real quick, like I highly recommend taking this time instead of, emailing every single producer that because I know everybody's doing that. Take this time to learn new skills, to find a hobby, to, like for me, it was diving into 3D, right? That to me was a way to practice my craft without having to get a whole crew together and gear together and, all that stuff. So, using this time to build a stronger foundation, because it will come back, and, getting caught with your pants down, so to speak, is not a great place to be.
What advice would you have for people who are trying to kind of make that switch in their brain? Like I remember thinking back to like myself maybe 5 years ago or so. I completely understand how and why people would derive their identity from being a DP, because I certainly felt that way about myself as well. But I especially felt that way when I was coming up, because it felt like you just had to put all of your energy and all of your time into improving your craft and achieving certain career goals and all of those things. And I think at the time, I would definitely have found it very hard to set that aside. Thankfully, it was kind of a good period of growth, but like having to go through that during COVID, for example, or during like these past few months, I think would be very difficult for 5 years ago me to kind of make that switch. But what would you say like helped you kind of realize that there's another way to approach this psychologically in that way?
I think the biggest thing for me was realizing that I can't really practice my craft whenever I want to, right? So I come from a family of artists. My dad's a painter. My mom's a graphic designer, like trained in the old school way, like pre-computer graphic design. And seeing the ability to just get up and have materials in front of you, like my dad can wake up in the morning and walk over to his, easel and just start painting. Whereas if I'm not actively hired on a project, I can't really practice my craft. I can, read, I can learn, I can do this stuff, but it's not like I can actually get a whole crew together and like light things and see how things react and learn through that process. So, part of it for me was figuring out ways that I could try and practice my craft. So again, with like the 3D, I was able to set up scenes and light them in any way that I wanted to. And I think that kind of made it made something click where I went further, and I was just like, okay, well, maybe I can get back into painting a little bit. Maybe I can practice my photography. Maybe it's something completely unrelated. I think when it's very busy and you're lamenting the things that you don't have time for, that should be your number one list of things to do when it's slow, right? If you're sitting there complaining that you don't have time to read books, well, now's a great time to read books, and these things help you become more rounded, right? Like if you're just shooting movies, if you're watching movies, you're shooting movies, your entire life is movies, 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 I think that cycle will start feeding on itself, and you'll end up making derivative work that you've derived from your previous work, which is derivative from the previous thing.
Right. Yeah.
I also think like there's such a high to shooting, honestly. Like it's such an adrenaline rush, and that's been an interesting thing. It's like regulating your sort of, I don't know, your mental state. It's like being on set is such a potent experience, and it's so kind of it's such a rush. And then in the times where it's slow, it's like how do you kind of create that same stimulation in your normal life. I think it's such a great point that there's such a barrier to entry to practicing cinematography, right? I think sometimes like cinematography is conflated with photography from certain people, and it's perceived to be like, just grab a camera and go shoot. But it's like, that's not really the case. It's really so much more complicated. Like you said, requires a crew, requires lights, requires expensive cameras. And so, yeah, this is really interesting what you bring up about 3D being a vehicle to exercise that same muscle without having to actually put together the resources and the physical, space and people to do it. I think that's really interesting.
When you say photography, like I have nothing but respect for photographers, of all types of photographers. I mean, you get one frame to tell a story. Like that's that's just daunting. But if I have my camera, I can go out and do street photography, and that to me is not exciting. I like to craft an image,
Right.
And the whole thing about like painting with light, right? Like, it's a little silly when you think about it, but like that is kind of what we do. And, I've done the street stuff, I've done the natural light, DP work, et cetera, but I love a good challenge with big lights, big crews, a complicated script, like make it as challenging as possible because that's what excites me about it.
Have you gotten into like Cinema 4D and any of those applications where you're actually like using virtual proxies of real world lighting tools to like create like an actual set and almost like replicate the experience of a film shoot, but just in a piece of software?
So yeah, I did Cinema 4D and now I'm working on some Blender stuff.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think for like to previs a shoot, right? If you're like trying to do like especially for stage stuff, like it's really useful because then you can figure out like where everything will fit. I work at this one stage that has this like stupid pillar right in the middle of it. And like it's so expensive to take out that it'd be cheaper to just like buy another space and start a new stage. So it's every time we shoot in there, it's like, okay, well, if we want to bring in this piece of gear, will it fit? So something like, C4D with real life objects makes sense. But in terms of hobbies that are kind of like irrelevant but relevant, right? Like cooking is one of my life's passions. And, people that know me, it's just like I'm posting stuff from barbecues, I'm posting plates that I make, et cetera, or and I know you cook too and you post some of that stuff. And, for me,
nothing like you, not even close to those cuts of meat on the barbecue. Oh, every time I see those, I'm like,
yeah, it's
David, when?
It's a little primal at times, which is kind of nice. But
I like that about it.
But like for me with cooking, I mean, what that's really helped me do is the kind of running theme with directors and producers that I work with and have great relationships with is food. So we'll get together and we'll cook a meal, and that just creates such like a relaxed environment where you get to connect as people. And then by the time you get on set, this last feature that I shot back in October is with, my great friend, Patrick Beesmans. And if you look at our text between each other, it looks like a cookbook, right? It's like, it's a little bit of movies, a lot of cooking, and we'll get together and we'll just cook all weekend and we'll eat food together and have conversations about that. And, by the time we got on set, it doesn't matter what the conversation was. We really didn't need to talk, right? Like it was like, okay, we're doing this shot. All right, I'm going to set it up. And it's like, okay, I trust you. I know what your thing is. Like we've talked about it and here we are, and we're making this movie and it just flows, So I had a long time ago, I had an agent that told me to stop doing that, to make my relationships more about business. And I was just like, well, I don't think this is going to work.
Yeah, that sounds like terrible advice.
Yeah.
So David, on our last episode, Orrin and I dove into the topic of AI and specifically answering some questions surrounding the challenges that AI might pose to the cinematography world, because some members of the salon expressed concern over AI. And so we would love to hear from you what your perspective is on AI. And I'd love to hear kind of where you're at with it, how it feeds into your work and your life, and where you see it going.
So, yeah, I mean, huge topic these days. I have a lot of thoughts, and anybody that follows me on Instagram knows that. I'm actually overwhelmed myself with the amount of stuff coming out. It's like every time I start looking at a tool and saying, oh, this is kind of interesting, let me see what it can do. But within a couple hours, I mean, it's not even like days anymore. It's like within a couple hours, some other thing comes out, I think, what was it, a couple weeks ago, there were like 3 announcements in one day. I think it was like GPT-4 and Midjourney and like some other thing, like all dropped at the same time. So, you know, I'm paying attention to it for numerous reasons. You know, I think when any new technology that comes along, I mean, it was something similar when digital was really starting to take over, right? Like if you didn't get with the times, you know, you might see your work drop off. So I look at it from like a career survival perspective. Also look at it from like a, you know, an interesting way to do things that you might not have been able to before, right? Like I grew up drawing and painting. I can take photographs, but I can't do them anywhere near as good or as quickly as Midjourney can. And, you know, when it comes to integrating that into work, I mean, it's a great way to share ideas with directors, work on mood boards, you know, even like seeing what pops out of it can be that first bit of almost like breaking the writer's block, or that like first, you know, the empty page syndrome. So there's a lot of positive uses. I think it's still very, very much in its infancy in terms of what is it going to mean for everybody and for, you know, for the industry, and how do we get around it. But like, you know, we were talking earlier, I don't know how to run a nonprofit, for example. So I popped into ChatGPT this morning and asked it a bunch of questions, and within half an hour, I now have a pretty solid idea of what it would take to turn the salon into a nonprofit. So it's my business partner, my lawyer, my, you know, sometimes accountant.
What do you think are the ethical boundaries of this? And I'm also talking about it beyond the industry, because I actually think in some ways the film industry specifically is relatively more insulated from this than other industries that could be completely kind of wiped out by this kind of technology emerging and no longer needing humans to perform certain menial organizational tasks and other things like that. But do you think we have, like as a society, a responsibility to, I don't know, set boundaries in terms of how much this impacts the way things are currently done? Or what are your thoughts on that, like big picture wise?
Yeah, I mean, that is the conversation, right? Like it's progressing at a pace so quickly that it's really hard to keep up. I think, you know, I was listening to this podcast, and this woman that was being interviewed was talking about this book about the building of the atomic bomb. And, you know, so when so all the scientists working on this, they were working on it thinking that Nazi Germany had their own atomic program going, and it was to build a deterrent, right? To build something, and they would beat the Nazis to the bomb, and that would help end the war. When it was found out that the Nazis did not have an atomic program, you know, I mean, I think they had like a very nascent one that got bought. I mean, we can get into World War II history, but that's a whole different thing. When it was found out that they didn't have a viable atomic program, one scientist quit in protest, not swaths of scientists. And there's almost this like hubris of like, let's see what we can do. Like, I want to see how far I can take this. Right. So I think that's kind of like where humanity is with AI right now. And, you know, with this talk of pausing development for 6 months or whatever, you know, the argument against that is, well, what if, you know, what if China is developing their own? What if Russia is developing their own? Like, are we going to be able to like regulate them too? Or are we just giving them 6 months to catch up? You know, and whatever your thoughts are on geopolitics, that's kind of like the thought of, you know, this arms race that we're having with AI. Recently, there was some papers written. I think Microsoft did an internal kind of paper on, you know, where GPT-4 is, and, you know, words and phrases like sparks of AGI, right? So AGI is artificial general intelligence, and it's something that can just do everything, right? And like the one limitation is that it lives on a computer, but, you know, ostensibly you could put it in a robot, and then who knows, right? So the idea is to say, all right, we've taken this technology this far, we're developing it at this rampant pace, but the safety boundaries are not developing as quickly. And so you get into this issue of alignment where, you know, you've created this essentially alien being. You don't really know why it's thinking the way it's thinking, why it's doing what it's doing. We just know that some of the outputs are, helpful for us. But, if it gets to a point where it's so powerful that it's unrecognizable to the human mind, like we have no clue what it would do, right? So like there are thought experiments where, you give it some innocuous task, and to succeed at that task, it would go about it in a way that we've never thought of, right? Like say, I want a cup of coffee, okay? And you'd think, oh, call up DoorDash or something. But there's also a world where it's just like, oh, you want a cup of coffee? Let's kill everyone on the planet so that you can definitely get your cup of coffee, like that sort of thing.
Right.
And it doesn't even think about like the morals or ethics, because we would have to give it to. So that's the issue of alignment. And I don't know. I'm not an expert here. These are all just things that I'm thinking about, and I could see it going in multiple different ways. There's like the idea of the Star Trek utopian future where we're in a post scarcity environment. Everybody has all their needs taken care of. We eradicate all disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the biggest, explosion of science and civilization that we've ever seen. And then there's, it's some tools, and then there's the, the Skynet Terminator kind of outcome.
This is developing so exponentially quickly that it feels hard to get in front of it, even if somebody wanted to, which I think is the tricky part. But I'm curious what you think about sort of narrowing the focus a little bit to the film industry. Like, what is your take on like the Writers Guild are in contract negotiations right now, and they sort of were had their hand forced a little bit by studios to put out a statement about their stance on integrating AI tools in writers' processes, and how that kind of squares with the contract negotiation and what is legally allowed to be included as a part of a writer's work versus limiting AI's use as just a support tool. Like, what do you think about that? And do you think that stuff's even enforceable?
I think in our world, I think there might be a little bit more safeguards against it as far as like creative stuff. If some of this stuff can't be like copyrighted, for example, because it was created by AI, then, can you turn that into a movie or a TV show or whatever? Is it something that you even want to put that money and effort into if potentially, a competitor could just be like, well, we'll just copy that because there's no copyright on it, so I think it kind of polices itself. I think in the grander scheme, there are certain jobs that will be affected, especially ones that are kind of more on like the productivity end. So, one way to think about it is if your job can be done remotely, then it's in danger of being automated. And especially stuff like legal, accounting, insurance, paperwork, right? Like, I don't know, like I said, I don't know how to like incorporate a business, but I had to guide me through how to incorporate a business. Last time I had my accountant do it, and this time I might have ChatGPT do it. I think as far as how it affects us, I think we'll start to see lower end content start being automated away. Stuff that like influencers do.
Right.
Really just basic, like a lot of the reels that pop up in your Instagram or whatever. Like I could see those being deep fakes with, AI writing and all that stuff. I think eventually it'll start working its way up. I think the stuff that's really the most safe at this point is stuff that's being done at a really high level, right? Like, even if you're using AI, but I look at something like Avatar 2, right? That's such like a stunning technological and storytelling achievement that stuff like that I would see being the last thing to be automated away in our business. But that doesn't mean it's not in danger of it long term.
Well, Oren, what you spoke about a lot last time was just not losing the human creativity. Do you want to speak a little bit about that and how that
100%.
is maybe a way to sort of avoid automation?
Yeah, well, I'm curious to hear what David thinks about that. Like, do you think that human touch is innate to like the, I guess, sanctity of art, especially like coming from an artist family? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a multifaceted thing, right? I think a lot of art, a lot of writing, anything that, music, et cetera, a lot of it's derivative, right? Like we feed off of what has already existed, right? And occasionally you might have someone that's so incredible that, they are able to take something and make it more than the sum of its parts. And I think right now with all these tools, we're at the point where, it can't make something greater than the sum of its parts. And that's where the human touch to me comes in. The person with the good
Right.
taste that has an idea and is able to then take all these different things and elevate them beyond, a purely, I hate to say like a purely derivative mechanism, but that's more or less what it is. But, your average stuff, like I could see like, children's books and children's whatever, like those are pretty basic, right? Like, you might have something that's a little bit more inspired, but, there's so much stuff out there and so much demand for content that, a lot of it is in danger, I would say.
Also, just to like bring it back, kind of back down to earth a little bit, I wanted to ask both of you if you have experienced it on a job yet.
Yeah, so I've actually done a few days as a AI concept artist. So speaking of, like taste, right? I was hired, I probably can't speak about the exact, jobs it was, but one that stuck out was I was hired by a production company to work with their director to overhaul the treatment. So, they basically had set up like your typical treatment, here's how we're going to shoot it, and this is what it is, and here's my vision, and then photo boards. And these photo boards are fine. They're like basic Photoshop comps, and they wanted to spice those up. So I spent the day working with the director, creating imagery for this treatment. And to me, it kind of felt like an extension of sitting down and shot listing, right? Sitting down and going through mood boards and references and stuff like that. So we were able to make images that were very specific to this project, and we were able to do it very quickly. It obviously, it's in the back of my mind is like the storyboard artists, like
Yeah.
whoever would have gotten hired on that, it's me instead, right? But I was able to use my own taste, my own creativity, my thoughts to go into that. I am not advertising myself as an AI concept artist because I think we're just in a moment now where it maybe has some demand. I don't think it's going to last long.
Warren, how about you? Have you seen it come up with jobs yet?
I haven't really seen it come up outside of maybe occasional images in a treatment that were I mean, this was probably a while ago, so Mid-Journey at the time, like V3, V4, had a very distinct look that was quite identifiable, that I think it's moved past. But the software that really interests me is Adobe Firefly, and using like a suite of AI tools to riff on and improve and adjust and modify pre-existing images. I think the way I could see something like that working is, people who currently have that job of storyboard artist, I think just the purview and the tools that they are going to have to learn in order to do that job are just going to change. Or people who have the job of treatment, creating treatments, which is definitely like a gig that exists right now behind the scenes in production companies. But I think, it's in that way, it very much is like adopting a new technology similar to the switch to digital, or and not just the switch to digital video, but even the switch, for example, to digital audio. Like when that switch happened, a lot of people who had very specific technical skills lost their jobs. Like you don't need people who know how to use magnetic tape anymore. You don't need that skill set. But those people didn't just go away. The ones who survived just shifted their skill set to digital audio recording. Same thing happened with digital video, right? Like people who were color timers in a photochemical process, some of them became DI colorists today, right? You can use the same science behind it, but adapt. You just have to adapt your skill set into a new tool set. And I think realistically, that's what we can expect from this technology. I mean, basically, my only fear with it really is just that companies, corporations, brands, etc., will see it as a shortcut in a negative way, like as something that can replace something that I don't think is replaceable. I've been working on this project recently that has a lot of visual effects work, and even just talking to the visual effects artists, like learning about how they're using machine learning and AI technology in visual effects workflows is really interesting, and how it efficientizes like all of these processes that used to be really menial and labor intensive. And it just opens up the ability for them to go in and like add that human touch even more, because they have more time to hand animate and hand adjust things and like elevate things from the 90% level that maybe can be automated to the like that last 10%, and just like bridge that creative gap. And I think that's really interesting. I hope we're able to continue like utilizing it in that way, and that people don't come along and say, oh, well, it can do 90% of the job and that's good enough. Like that's sort of my biggest fear. But yeah.
For me, it's been seeing it in treatments like you mentioned, Oren, seeing generated images and working off those as direct references. And I don't know, I feel it's pretty wild, to be honest. I think it's wild also that the three of us are even having this conversation right now, to be honest. Like, it's
I
sort
mean,
of a
one
little...
year ago, or maybe not 1 year ago, but before Midjourney came along, like let's say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't think we could have ever anticipated that we would be sitting here having this
Well, how
conversation.
about the fact that we decided to do this podcast in like December, January, and this wasn't even on a list of topics or a list of anything, and here we are 3 months later, and it's...
Well, it just speaks to how quickly it's developing, right? Yeah.
Our first 2 episodes are heavily, discussions on AI. It's only going to continue. It's wild. I mean, it's very, very fascinating.
I mean, we are being impacted by it. There's like, you can't hide from it. So we may as well talk about it. I mean, my general kind of take on it is like, okay, these are tools that make certain things that we do a lot faster, more efficient, potentially more creative. Like, I've found that it does, spark ideas for me. It's not to say I haven't been going through an artistic existential crisis for the last 7 months ever since it came out. But that's kind of my focus is, let me be at the front of the pack with tools. And, that's where I've also always been as a DP too. Like, I've focused on very technical stuff. I started out the gates doing like phantom stuff and, robot stuff and all that. And that's how I differentiate myself. So, for me, it's that kind of tool with the thought in the back of my mind that, civilization could end in a year or two. So, no pressure.
It's always possible. It's always possible. I mean, that's possible anyway, though, right? Like, there's other things that could bring that about regardless. So, might as well just learn to stop worrying and love the bomb.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
I think too, like on a positive note, the empty page syndrome thing you mentioned, David, I think is super relevant. And I think that I've noticed that as well. It's the sort of iterative nature of it has blown my mind. Like the fact that you can ask it to write you something and then say, make it more casual or make it longer or make it shorter or make it 20 characters long. It's like, we just never had a technology like that. And I just find it so useful for so many different things, both for, maybe cinematography needs, but also just for simple things in life, just being able to kind of, it's like this very objective entity, and I'm sure people would argue that it's not objective at all, but it's like in the past you could, like you said, you could ask, an assistant or a friend or a family member about, to look at something you wrote. And now you can ask this sort of like third party that is extremely knowledgeable and can react instantaneously to iterate on something that you've fed it. And yeah, it's just remarkable. It's incredibly useful.
Well, here's a use case that I was playing around with recently, and I have a feeling Oren's going to hate this one, but what I did was I created a prompt in ChatGPT where I was like, take this script and then create a table, like create a shot list, and column 1 is the scene heading. Column 2 is scene 18, shot 1, 18.1, like all this stuff that we spend hours and hours in spreadsheets doing. But I asked it to come up with shots based on each scene description and what happens in the scene. And then I also told it, I'm shooting on this camera, I'm shooting on these lenses. There are certain technical limitations. So if you suggest like a close-up on an anamorphic with a close focus of this, maybe tell me to use a diopter. Right, that sort of thing. And then in the last column, create a Midjourney prompt where I could take that shot, feed it into Midjourney, bring it back in, and then have an AI-generated shot list with images to go with it. Now, Is it the most creative thing? No. I mean, most of the shots were kind of basic, like, oh, it's a panning shot, it's a this. And so I refined it. I was like, okay, well, I have a techno crane. Now what can I do? Like that sort of stuff. But, to at least build the skeleton, which would have taken me hours in the past, now I'd copy and paste it. And then I can actually go in and start really thinking about the shots instead of like, am I on 17.3? I don't have to think about that anymore. So, again, for me, it's how can I be more efficient? How can I use my time better? I think in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, when is a company going to abuse this? Kind of like what you were saying. It's like, oh, well, here's your shot list. Here's the content, blah, 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 blah. And I think that will happen. But, the best I can do right now is learning as much as I can and, being good at it.
Yeah, exactly. But no, to me, that actually is like the perfect use case for it, is to eliminate a long, arduous, technical process that just frees up more time for you to think about a project as opposed to sitting down and creating a shot list spreadsheet template. So yeah, I think that's awesome, actually.
Okay. All right.
Maybe a little scary, just again, in the same thing that you just pointed out, is that somebody else who isn't thinking about it as a tool to support creativity, but a tool to replace creativity, could exploit it. That's where it gets scary for me. But that's not on us. That's why I do still think it is, it's on us to define how we're going to use these tools and to push back on having other people who don't understand how this can support creativity as opposed to replace creativity, to define that for us. But yeah, I mean, it will happen, and yeah, it's just going to be on us to decide how we want to deal with it, and how much we want to push back on it.
And when it's not on us anymore, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Well, by that point, hopefully we're just floating around on like Wall-E chairs.
Yes.
And just, so that would be great, actually. I mean, if we could just skip ahead to that, I think we would all be happy.
All right, so we're gonna close each episode of the podcast by asking the question, what is the most compelling piece of art that you've seen recently? So I'd love to open it up to the two of you and just hear about something that has taken your breath away recently.
You want to go first, Oren?
David, you take it.
So I would say two things. I know I'm already breaking the rules here, but I just watched a movie called The Stranger with Joel Edgerton and Sean Harris. I loved the way that it was shot, and I loved that it didn't treat me like I'm an idiot. It was very hard to follow along, and it challenged me, and I enjoyed that. And I'm also reading a book called Black Edge about insider trading on Wall Street, which I find pretty fascinating.
Nice. I haven't seen that movie yet. I try to watch everything, and I missed that one. I remember the poster because they both have big scraggly beards, and they sort of line their two faces together. I can visualize it, but I didn't see that movie. So that's great. I'm going to check that out this week. So for me, last night, I watched Purple Rain for the first time, which I had never seen. And the movie itself is kind of okay. Like, the plot doesn't really make any sense. It's sort of all over the place, but the music is so good. I mean, I've obviously heard the songs before, and I've listened to the album, but watching Prince and the Revolution perform the songs on screen is just like unbelievable. And he was 26 when they made that movie, and he wrote all those songs. It just blew my mind. So that was definitely a big inspiration for me last night, like rocking out in my living room to Purple Rain and When Doves Cry.
Wow, I love both of those.
Just in your boxers with a button-down shirt.
Absolutely, yeah, and my little nightcap.
Yeah.
So for me, the piece of art that I witnessed recently was the movie Her, which is on the topic of AI. But I heard someone say that they rewatched it with all the AI stuff going on, and I rewatched it under that sort of guise, which was sort of to see how it sort of treated that topic. And what surprised me was just how visually stunning it is. And I feel like so much of the sort of style of cinematography that we try to emulate now was sort of born in that film in certain ways. And yeah, I just think that Hoytema's work in that, as well as most of the work he does, is just absolutely stunning.
Agreed.
Great movie.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for coming on today, David. I appreciate all of your wisdom and your efforts with the group, and I'm so excited to be having these conversations with you. And just wanted to thank you both.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been great, and again, I'm really grateful for you guys. So I'm excited to see where this all goes.
This episode of the Cinematography Salon podcast was produced by Peter Pascucci, Oren Sofer, and David Kruta, with original music by One Wave. We created this episode in partnership with the Cinematography Salon, and we would like to extend a special thanks to the salon community for sourcing topics for this episode. If you enjoyed listening to the episode, we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes and news. Thanks.